Ardmore Music Hall. My name's Dennis. Her name is Susana.
My name's Susana.
And she spent a good chunk of the last 25 years taking pictures of the Grateful Dead. And she's made a wonderful book. The truth is that we are a victim of her success, and that is we've already sold out. If you're interested in this, and it's, if I say so, a wonderful book, and we're going to talk about it for about the next 15 minutes before you guys get to the music, which is the point. But you can stand a little talk, because it's talk about beautiful pictures, and these pictures are, there's a sample book that you can look at, and we are frantically reordering another load of books, which have to come from China, so it's going to take a minute.
Slow boat.
So, come see us at the merch table and sign your email address, and, you'll get a book in January. My name's Dennis. I was the Grateful Dead's publicist for about 25 years. And I had been the publicist for about 6 months when I heard her name for the first time, because it was 1984, and Linda Kahn, who was John Kahn was Jerry's left arm or right arm, whatever, his other guy, his bass player. And Linda called me. They were about to do a duo show at what was once Philharmonic Hall and is now known as Avery Fisher Hall at Lincoln Center. And Susana wanted to take pictures, but she hadn't made any prior arrangements because these were sort of innocent days. And then she discovered what it was like at a classical music venue, which is informal, doesn't work. So they called me, and it was like 10 minutes before the show. And it's 1984, and there are no cell phones, and I have no way of talking to anybody that has anything to do. So I basically said, "The fuck are you bothering me for?" No, I didn't actually say that. I just basically said, "I'm sorry, I can't help." This is an interesting start to a relationship that's now 31 years old, and I would like to add that I think my batting average of assistance has sort of gone up since then. Tell them about yourself.
Okay, well, this was very exciting for me to be shooting Jerry Garcia at Lincoln Center. I grew up in Manhattan and was at a lot of classical music, etc. events in Lincoln Center. Then I got on the bus in the late 70s and started shooting the Dead in the early 80s. And it was a wonderful transition from my old life to my new life to be at Lincoln Center with Jerry Garcia and my friends Linda and John Kahn. So Linda eventually talked to Steve Parrish, who got me a pass, and I did take pictures, and some of those are in the book. Later, a little bit later, Dick Latvala, who you all know from Dick's Picks, introduced me to Dennis. We were neighbors in San Francisco. And a little while after that, Jerry, who I had met socially through Rockin' Nikki Scully, our kids went to Wavy Gravy's camp together, etc. And Jerry said to me, "Hey man, you and McNally ought to get together." So that was kind of shocking and a big surprise, but Dennis did get my name on the guest list, as he had promised, with a photo pass. And we were married that year, September 29th, 1985. And Jerry walked me down the aisle, which is also in the book. And from that point, even though I had been around the scene for quite a few years before, Dennis made an honest woman of me, so to speak. I realized I was a part of a large and increasingly expanding family that knew how to put the fun in dysfunction.
Actually, we were kind of black belts in dysfunction. Um, so I got into this scene. I wrote a book about Jack Kerouac, and I sent. In the course of doing that, I wanted to write a book about the Grateful Dead, but I had no clue how to reach out to the Grateful Dead. So I sent a copy of the book to all of you. Should be able to recite this: Post Office Box 1065, San Rafael, California. And the lady who answered that mail, who's still to this day a lovely woman by the name of Eileen Law, handed it to Jerry. And eventually, long story short, I met Jerry and I said, I sent you this book about Kerouac. And although I think I did a decent job of the book, the fact is that Jerry really, really, really honored Jack Kerouac as sort of one of his mentors and role models. And when he heard that, you're the guy who did the Kerouac book? And he hopped up and ran across the room and shook my hand and said, that's a great book. And I said, aw, shucks. And a few months later, he sent a couple of guys, and they said, Jerry says, why don't you do us? Which is to say, why don't I write a book about the Grateful Dead? Which is, of course, what I've been plotting and scheming to do for 7 years. And so I was cool. I said, well, that sounds like an okay idea. And then I went home and got seriously trashed. And started working on that book. And eventually I was running out of money, and they needed a publicist. And one day, a lovely woman who was the receptionist at the Grateful Dead said, what are we going to do about the media? Nobody returns their calls. Then they keep calling me back, and they're annoying me. And Jerry said, get McNally to do it. He knows that shit. Thus, I passed the extreme, complicated vetting process of the Grateful Dead. Actually, there's a grain of truth to that, because I'd been around for 3 years and I hadn't pissed off anybody too seriously badly. So I became the band's publicist. As I say, about 6 months before I met Susana. I would like to announce to one and all, you may be shocked to know this, but in the middle 1980s, to have a Grateful Dead laminate made you extremely attractive to a certain sort of woman. And for about 3 months, I evaluated that attraction. It seemed like a very good idea, and I wanted to explore that in depth. And then I blew out my experimental qualities by falling in love with a woman and saying, there goes that idea. So we got married. And Jerry, as Susana says, walked her down the aisle. And we began life as the Dead's publicist and best known photographer, at least to the band. It wasn't always easy. The Grateful Dead stage and the area immediately around the stage was run by the crew, who could be capable of serious crankiness. That's putting it really nicely. I might add that, it was one of those things where the band was a little busy, so obviously they couldn't do it. So somebody had to decide who got to be on stage. And it wasn't like the Rolling Stones where you could just say, nobody, because they were the Grateful Dead. So the crew drew the short straw on that one, which led to Susana having Billy Grillo, who was Bill Kreutzmann's drum roadie, calling her over and saying,
Well, yeah, I saw Billy Grillo, who could be very fearsome. I mean, he was a biker. He's actually the biker in the Hell in a Bucket video. And so he beckons me over, and I thought, oh, my God, I am in some kind of trouble. I've done something. And, being married to Dennis, trouble with the crew meant trouble at home, and it just wasn't a good situation. But what he actually wanted was that he had gotten his dog. He had a Rottweiler named Caesar. The crew had a lot of the crew had Rottweilers, and Caesar had been given a pair of earphones that matched Billy's, and he wanted a photo of the two of them with their headphones on, and that was the picture I took, and that's in the book. Another fun experience I had with the crew was that I was at Front Street where the Grateful Dead did their recording in the 80s, and Steve Parrish said to me very seriously, you can shoot anything you want, just not the gaffer tape ball. Well, what do you think the gaffer tape ball was? I mean, I had absolutely no idea. And I went to find it, and it was the crew's Echo Arts project. They wrapped up all the gaffer's tape from that taped down the cords in every show and wrapped it up into a ball. Its name was Richard, and they put it back on the truck. And I found it, of course, and photographed it with Healy's son playing on it, and that's in the book too.
One of the first, what Susana described as her first Grateful Dead picture took place at the 20th anniversary.
You have it backwards.
I know.
Okay.
I'm aware of
Okay.
that.
Okay.
Gracie, it's okay. This is called timing.
Okay.
So in June of 1985, we had our 20th anniversary, and I was getting harassed by the media to deliver media, stuff. And so I went to the band and I said, listen, you got to do a press conference. They're driving me crazy. And they went, oh, do we have to? Yes, you do. So they did. So we lined up. It was a Saturday afternoon at the Greek, and they all came out. And what happened was Susana was off facing them to the far right. Next to her was a particularly stupid TV guy. And he said, I understand that you guys are on drugs all the time when you play. Are you on drugs now? Dead silence. So the guy asked the question again, this time in a louder voice. Jerry says, I see his lips moving, but I don't hear anything. So the guy asked the question yet again in a really loud voice, and that was when I snapped this picture, because they all have their heads turned to me, but it was really to him because he was right next to me, with this incredulous look on their faces. Which may explain why they didn't really want to do a lot of press conferences. I'm going to show you one other picture. Which, for my money, was Susana's first great portrait of the Grateful Dead. And for those of you who have not been fortunate enough to come to San Francisco, the band's favorite venue was the Greek Theater in Berkeley. And, it's an amphitheater. Down at the bottom is the stage. But if you go up to the top, there's a grassy lawn above the concrete, and you look out over the city, the campus, the city of Berkeley, San Francisco Bay, the Golden Gate Bridge, and the Pacific Ocean in the distance, which is to say, it's kind of beautiful. And Susana, after 3 years of getting to know the Greek, the band, the setup.
And it was the penultimate next to last night at the Greek Theater. And finally, I had the tripod, I had the laminate, I knew what kind of exposure I needed and so forth. And I go up to the top of the Greek, and I also, when the blue coat told me that no, you can't be here, I pointed to my laminate and said, what part of All Access don't you understand? And I got to take this picture, which I think is my favorite Grateful Dead picture ever.
It's exceptional, and it's in the book,
and
like all the other good
book,
stuff.
Yeah.
If I can just say, being a sleazy publicist, is that redundant? Being a publicist, most Grateful Dead picture books focus, photography joke, focus on the band on stage, because that's usually what photographers took. This book covers all the other, it covers them on stage, but it covers all the other ground too. And it's fun. She's also kind of fun to work with. It's no fun yelling at her though, because she'll yell back. Anyway, I would like to tell you one other story, or I'm going to set it up, which is, as some of you may have noticed, there was a fair amount of not always fun politics in the Grateful Dead world over the last few years. And that sort of slowed down the process until finally, last New Year's, Susana went to see Dead and Company.
Well, it was the Christmas show so in San Francisco at Bill Graham's Civic Center, and I really felt like I was home again, and that all the years had passed, and the music. The guys were having so much fun on the stage, and it was just wonderful, and I felt really good about all my years and all my experience with the Dead, and just went home and started working on the book, and that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
So I'll tell you one additional sort of perfect moment. I'm gonna actually steal this story from you.
Okay.
You should tell it, and that is simply this. She did finally. She should have started it a year earlier, except that I was a smart enough husband to keep my mouth shut. And finally, the time, all good things in all good time, and there she went. And she got a great team together of a couple of Deadheads who do wonderful, a design guy named Don Passwark and a publisher guy named Freddie, and off we went. And long about July, I guess, and I dotted all the I's, I crossed all the T's, and I made sure there were commas. But I had, this is not my book by any means. But I watched it all happen, and it just, they get it, and they send it off via, internet to China, which is where all printing is done now. It's the only practical place. Yes, we outsourced. Sorry. And and they sent the stuff to this printing plant in China on the day that the Dalai Lama visited President Obama, which is to say the day that everybody in the ruling elite of China went, "Ugh." And so, as soon as she sent it, we got this message.
Is this a book about religion? So first we thought, wow, did they know that the Grateful Dead is kind of an obscure religious cult in America? No, that wasn't what it was. What it was that there's a lot of stuff in the book about Mickey Hart and the Kyoto monks. So the Chinese saw these shaven-headed guys in long saffron robes, and also another thing with Mickey in front of a cross at San Quentin, and they thought it was a book about religion, and that it might, heaven forbid, have to go through the culture ministry. Fortunately, Freddie Hahn, the publisher, our publisher and liaison with the Chinese talked them out of it. Smooth talker. They were also confused about about page 257, which is a reproduction of the cover printed on perforated blotter paper. Totally benign, but still.
Yeah, no, it's up to you to put anything on it you want. I would like to simply add that in the spirit of all good things Grateful Dead, after all that, and after all the work, and after braving through all the difficulties, they shipped it to us 3 days early, which does not happen. And which is to say, like we're used to say, it all came out just exactly perfect. Thank you. And if you want to come take a look, come visit us at the merch table. Whoops. Want to get those?